Hello and welcome to Timeless with Julie Hartman Live. It is Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. I'm Julie Hartman, and it is great, as always, to be with you. Now, it has officially been a week, actually just under a week, since President Donald Trump was elected again to be the 47th president of the United States. And he has come out swinging as far as his appointments. We know that Elise Stefanik, for instance, was appointed the ambassador to the United Nations, Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, alongside several other appointments that he has made public. And President Trump has also come forth with some of his greater plans for his new administration. And one of the most controversial of those plans is what he says he wants to do with the Department of Education. Now, we on the show talk all the time about what a destitute state the United States is in with regard to education, that there is such a high percentage of young American pupils who can't read at grade levels, who cannot meet the civics requirements for their grade levels, or even the math and science requirements for their grade levels. And Donald Trump, God bless him, has made that very public. And he has said that one of the things he wants to do is overhaul the Department of Education. Let's listen to a video that he just released where he explicated this.
And one other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse. We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're absolutely at the bottom. We're one of the worst. So you can't do worse. We're going to end education coming out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up, all those buildings all over the place, and you have people that in many cases hate our children. We're going to send it all back to the states. Thank you very much.
Now, unsurprisingly, President Trump has been met with a lot of flack for that statement, and many people are characterizing it as draconian, largely because they don't understand what that actually means. It sounds like a big deal to close down the Department of Education, but I have hope that there seem to be some more plans backing that make that seem a little bit less frightening. Here to talk about what that may entail is Max Eden. Mr. Eden has come onto the show before. I remember about a year ago, we talked about his congressional testimony where he very bravely and eloquently talked about how this alleged book ban that Republicans are supposedly behind is really not what you would think it is. Mr. Eden is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and he's an affiliate of AEI's James Q. Wilson program in K-12 education studies. Before joining AEI, he was a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He has authored many reports and studies on education, and he is also the co-author of the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller, Why Meadow Died: The People and Policies That Created the Parkland Shooter and Endanger America's Students. And he's also the co-editor of another book called The Every Student Succeeds Act: What It Means for Schools, Systems, and States. Mr. Eden, welcome back on to Timeless.
Yeah, thanks so much. So great to be back here.
Now, is AEI based out of Washington, D.C.?
We are, yes, right by DuPont Circle.
Oh, I love DuPont Circle. I lived there actually when I was in college. We were sent home due to the COVID lockdowns, and I had to Zoom school. And my friend and I said, we're not going to stay in our childhood bedrooms. We might as well go and live somewhere. And we lived in DuPont Circle, right by Calorama, where the Clintons and the Obamas and Ivanka Trump,
yeah.
Yes, lived there at the time. What's it like right now in D.C.?
I think, it's the spirit of most DC dwellers, right, which as of the polls, I think we're 96, 97% pro-Harris, seems fairly sullen. But you don't get the same sense of righteous indignation or rage, rather, that you did 4 years ago. So I think that there's a sense amongst the kind of the professional DC class that this wasn't a fluke, that they've been beaten, and they're just trying to process that emotionally and thus far the emotion hasn't turned to rage.
Well, good. I remember when I was there 4 years ago for the 2020 election, everything was boarded up. And I imagine it was a similar thing in this 2024 election. But to your point, thankfully, we're not seeing the rage go onto the streets in violent form, at least not yet.
No, not yet, thank God.
So let's talk about this. What this may entail, Donald Trump's announcement that he would overhaul the Department of Education. Can you first please explain to us how the government even came to oversee education and what the Department of Education looks like right now?
Absolutely. So traditionally, constitutionally, education is a role that is entrusted to the states. The states, for the most part, entrusted to school districts. And historically, states and school districts have partnered together to fund and deliver education. Now, in the mid-'60s, as part of the civil rights kind of reform movement, the thought was that money could fix the problems that we've seen with entrenched poverty. Money coming from the federal government could overcome, the structural racism that was very real in the Jim Crow era. And so in the mid-'60s, Johnson passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was designed to send money to schools that would otherwise be significantly underfunded compared to their peers, right? And as time went on, eventually DC policymakers started to ask, well, what are we getting for this money? How do we know how it's being spent? How do you know if it's working? And kind of string after string after string after string gets attached to the money, to the point where you have what is effectively a source of 10% of the money becoming a source of a massive amount of strings that is significantly inhibiting and controlling the way that states and school districts can deliver education in a way that, is still the open question that I think, if anything, that the answer is going to come down resoundingly on the no side of how do we know that this money and these strings are working? And so when you hear President Trump, when you've heard many Republicans before him come out with the line or the policy proposal that we need to dismantle the Department of Education, they're fundamentally saying that this habit that we've gotten ourselves into of attaching a massive amount of strings to a minor revenue stream is in nobody's interest.
Now, what is the role that teachers' unions play in U.S. education?
Yeah, teachers' unions play a profound role both at the local, in some cases the state, and also certainly at the federal government, right? The Department of Education was founded in 1980 by Jimmy Carter as a giveaway to the National Education Association, the nation's largest teachers' union. And, outside of the fact that conservatives kind of think this doesn't need to exist, it's not worth it, conservatives who study this more closely know that the Department of Education was literally designed as a campaign giveaway and a platform for lobbying efforts by the teachers union, and it acts in many ways as kind of the DC proxy of the teachers union's will and whim. And so, the local level, you have a lot of problems with teachers union capture because school board elections are frequently off cycle, they're low turnout races. So in a low turnout race, the union endorsed candidate and the candidate that has the union machine can win. But at the federal level, you get all sorts of ways that just untold tens, hundreds, billions of dollars get funneled to local schools that don't need it, to teachers union aligned advocacy groups, to the unions themselves, kind of through proxies. So it's kind of a trough that was designed especially for them that they are particularly good at feeding at the federal level.
I read Tom Sowell's book about charter schools, which was excellent, and I learned about how hard it is to fire a teacher because of the teachers unions. And oftentimes these individuals are sent to rubber rooms or they do administrative tasks or paperwork for a year or two, and then they are funneled back into school districts. And Tom Sowell contended that they're often put into low-income, overwhelmingly minority school districts where they'll go, well, those students aren't going to succeed anyway. We'll give them the rubber room teachers. Help us understand what barriers the establishment of teachers unions pose to the education of our children.
Yeah, this is primarily a local rather than a federal issue, but teachers unions have an incentive to bargain on behalf of all of their members and to give protections to all of their members. They do not represent the interests of parents. They don't represent the interests of students. They represent the interests of teachers. And it's in teachers' collective interests, not necessarily the individual interest of many of the good teachers, but if your job is to protect all teachers, that necessarily means that you must protect the bad teachers. You must protect the teachers who teach poorly. You must protect the teachers who conduct themselves unprofessionally. You must protect the teachers that engage in inappropriate conduct of a variety of manners with students. That's just literally the contract that they negotiate with the school districts, which they have all of the leverage that they need to in states that entertain such contracts. They have every incentive to give every protection possible to the worst actors.
Wow. And who decides the educational curriculum? Is it on a state-by-state basis?
Largely. I mean, the states will set standards and to a much smaller and rarer degree curriculum, and then local school districts are entrusted to kind of deliver those standards. So, in a state like Louisiana, the state might say, hey, here are a few curriculums that we think are good. You can choose between. In a state like Ohio, there might be a 50-page document on general social studies standards, and the school district will just have to buy or create curriculum that's aligned to those standards. You're starting to see a movement a little bit more towards not quite a state mandated, but a state endorsed curriculum in Texas. But for the most part, it's local school districts that are kind of buying vendor approved curriculum off the shelves that are aligned to state standards. So the federal government, fortunately, doesn't have that much of a role in it, except for, of course, that we have mandated reading and math tests in grades 3 through 8 as part of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So the fact that, your kid has to take a standardized test in all of those years, that's not a state issue. That's not a local decision. That's a federal mandate. And can kind of indirectly drive a lot of curricular decisions that schools are making.
You go to the website of the nation's report card where they detail the results grade by grade of those standardized tests, and it is so bleak. If you care to depress yourself, I don't know why you would, but just in case you're in the mood to depress yourself, go on that website and you'll just see down arrow, down arrow, down arrow to signify that since 2018, consistently across the board, we've just gone down and down. What state, I'm curious, would you say has the best public school system? And then which state would you say has the worst public school system, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the best would probably be the state of Florida at this point for a variety of reasons. One is that out of any state in the country, I was just looking at NAEP data, National Report Card data the other day. It's the single best state in the country to be a low-income student for. I think it's currently ranked about number 3rd or 4th in the country overall in terms of achievement in a couple of metrics. And when you look at kind of ROI, it is either best or second best with Utah in terms of how effective it is per pupil dollar spent. But in addition to the public system, they also have an extremely robust charter school sector. They also now have universal private school choice. So if you're a student in Florida, you can go to public schools that give you the best bang for the taxpayer buck of basically any state in the country, or you can go to a charter school, or you take that money to a private school, and you can take $6,000-$7,000 of money with you. Now, the worst, I mean, that's a harder question. Honestly, a question I get less often, but from a return on investment perspective, the state of New York is nothing to be pleased about. New York City achievement is low and lagging at closer to $30,000 per pupil rather than $8,000 per pupil or so in the state of Florida. So you have, school districts serving millions of kids in New York, spending 3 times as much money as in the state of Florida, getting poorer results.
That doesn't shock me. On both fronts, the best and the worst. So in addition to what we heard a few minutes ago where President Trump was saying that he wants to overhaul the Department of Education. He also said that he wants to do a few more things kind of under that banner. He said he wants to restore disciplinary action to public schools. He said any student that misbehaves or, talks back to a teacher or significantly disrupts the classroom environment is out. He also said he would like to restore prayer to public schools. And there was another one that I'm forgetting, though there are so many. Yes, he said that he wants to reinstate a curriculum that makes students love America again. Now, these all sound like, at least from my perspective, some people may disagree with me, these sound like fantastic things. What power does the president have, though, in actually making this happen? I mean, what do you think he can realistically achieve as far as these goals, which he has outlined?
Yeah, I mean, it depends goal by goal and mechanism by mechanism, right? So I'll take those one by one and feel free to redirect me. But on the school discipline side, we've really seen a massive shift away from traditional discipline where the teacher is trusted, the teacher is empowered. When a teacher sends a student to the principal's office, the principal backs the teacher's play because the principal trusts the teacher to exert authority. We've seen the Department of Education actually under Obama for the most part, and then Biden as well, try to mitigate, if not eliminate that by undermining teacher authority, undermining teacher discretion, claiming that detentions, suspensions, expulsions are inherently racist, and really changing the way that discipline is done in a more lenient direction. So we've seen how that can be done kind of from the left toward the more lenient perspective. The question, though, of how that can be done from at a federal level from the right towards a stricter perspective, I don't know exactly. This is an issue that I've given a considerable amount of thought to, right? I mean, what I would expect, hope, and think could be reasonably accomplished is whomever the next secretary is, and for all we know, it's been tweeted out as we've been talking, right? But there's a lot that can be done at the state level on school discipline, and it should be done at the state level of school discipline. And this is an area in which I think conservatives and Republicans have really had an utter failure of leadership. So you could see a Secretary of Education take this issue to the bully pulpit, go to state capitals, and basically say, listen, my goal is to get 20 states to pass stricter discipline standards because that's the right model of the federal approach on school discipline. The second thing you mentioned was prayer in schools. That's a legal question that would probably involve the Attorney General, maybe the Office of Legal Counsel, and the Secretary of Education issuing an advisory opinion or a memo that would, argue that there is more room in previous Supreme Court decisions or argue that in certain circumstances the reasoning of previous Supreme Court decisions wouldn't stand. And then basically telegraphing that schools have more freedom than they might think to do this, right? There's absolutely no way that the federal government can mandate or enforce prayer in schools, but there would be a way for the Trump administration to insist that room be open for them. And the third item that you mentioned,
the loving America again.
Yes. So they're right. Like we conservatives in general, conservatives have a strong belief that there should not be a federally mandated school curriculum, right? But we've seen the left take federal money and plow it into, their friends' coffers to create anti-American curriculum. And it would be, not only not unreasonable, but I think not expected to imagine the Trump administration would try to find ways to, help get started and kind of get off the ground, patriotic education, more things in the line of the 1776 Commission, and then, again, work with states in their curriculum adoption process to kind of nudge using more the bully pulpit than any federal carrot or string, but kind of nudge them to these new resources that have been created kind of generally under their auspices.
You mentioned President Obama and President Biden kind of revoking the disciplinary authority of teachers by saying that certain disciplinary codes are inherently racist. How did they do that? How did they have the power to do that, or how did they functionally make that happen?
Well, so this is an interesting question. I think gets to what could be, and what I expect will be a very interesting storyline of the Trump administration. Right? They did that through civil rights law because Title VI of the Civil Rights Act says, broadly, no discrimination. Right? So traditionally, what that has meant in the context of school discipline is if a black kid and a white kid both swear at a teacher, you can't give the white kid a detention and the black kid a suspension if they're otherwise equal in their prior behavior, right? What the Obama administration did was they said, all right, we're moving from disparate treatment to disparate impact. So if two black students and a white student all swear at a teacher and are all disciplined equally, they could still be violating federal civil rights law depending on the racial composition of their school district. Basically, any school district that disciplined black students at a substantially higher rate than white students was assumed to be violating federal civil rights law. And if you're violating federal civil rights law, you need to come back into compliance. And you can do that by making a voluntary resolution agreement with the federal government. So the government says you're violating federal civil rights law, we can take away all of your money, or you can agree to our terms. And school districts agree to their terms, right? So this is something that both Obama and Biden did on discipline. Both Obama and Biden did on transgender issues. Obama more than Biden, but Biden's trying to do on, college campus allegations of sexual assault. And after the first Obama term, the attitude amongst kind of conservative education policymakers, wonks, watchers was, this was an egregious abuse of power. This is a federal overreach of authority. We need to roll this back. We need to stop this. And kind of at the time, around 2016, 2017, you'd find a couple people who would float, well, maybe instead of stopping this, we just do what they're doing. Right. But the argument will always be, no, don't do that, just because then that'll give them ammo, that'll give them ideas, they'll hit you back twice as harder. And so what you saw DeVos do, who I think was a very successful education secretary in many ways, but you saw her basically only roll things back and say, we're not going to do things by pen and phone. We're not going to do things by Dear Colleague letter. We're going to undo what was done, and hopefully then there will be peace. And then there wasn't peace. And so now, and I can't speak on behalf of the Trump campaign, the Trump administration, transition team. I have no affiliation. I can only speak to kind of what's going on in policymaking circles in D.C., but there's much more of an attitude of, it's no longer, hey, they broke the rules, we need to restore the rules, and it's more, all right, well, for 12 of the past 16 years, these have been the rules, so, all right, those are the rules.
Right.
And we could use Title VI, which says that you can't have a racially hostile environment. We could maybe even use the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution to say that all forms of racial stereotyping, which DEI is nothing but, violates the Civil Rights Act and violates the Constitution. We can say, we can not only say no, Title IX doesn't require biological males to play in women's sports. We can say that Title IX requires the biological males must not play in women's sports. Same thing with bathrooms, same thing with locker rooms, same thing in different mechanisms with secret gender transitions in schools, with teaching kids the doctrines of gender ideology. And so, while Trump has run on abolishing the Department of Education, which, it's a tough goal. It's hard to see how that doesn't take 60 votes in the Senate, and it's hard to see how there are 60 votes in the Senate anytime soon. But Trump also ran on getting, boys out of girls' locker rooms, boys out of girls' sports, critical race theory out of school, transgender insanity out of school, really enforcing campus anti-Semitism. All of those things his Department of Education could do, and I think could be a big part of the story. And part of the, what could be a funny end effect of it, right, is the whole abolish the Department of Education thing. Conservatives both have our kind of prior philosophical principles, governance reasons for believing what we do, but we also have a long list of grievances of things that the department has done that we think are bad and don't like. And the Democrats have neither of those two things. But if your ultimate goal is to abolish the Department of Education, you need Democrat votes. And so one way to do that is by using the department to do things that Democrats will object to, that they won't like.
Boy, as you were speaking, I was thinking that the Civil Rights Act is just the gift that keeps on giving. Here in California, there's the, I believe it's called the UNRUH Civil Rights Act, UNRUH. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. But Governor Gavin Newsom used it as a mechanism to demand that private businesses have a gender-neutral toy section, private businesses that have 500 or more employees. And then hearing you talk about how much it's been used to counter disciplinary mechanisms in schools, allow this crazy transgenderism to infiltrate, it just really makes you think about it. But finally, I know we have limited time, and I so appreciate your coming on the show again. You know, to kind of pivot to a particularly sobering subject, we know that here in the United States, we have a particularly high rate of school shootings, which I know you've done an immense amount of research about. In fact, as I said at the beginning of the episode, you wrote a book about it. Why do you think that is? And what can we do to make our schools safer? I remember when Betsy DeVos, who you had mentioned was the head of the Department of Education under Trump's first administration, she had said that perhaps it would be wise for every teacher to have a gun in schools. And being in California, I think I was in college at the time, or maybe in high school, and people just were up in arms thinking that was the most ludicrous thing in the world. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few contributing factors, and then the question is, you know, what are the real mechanisms that we can pull, both in general and in education policy, to address them, right? I mean, one, which I think conservatives don't like to hear, but it's just, you know, generally true, is that there is a wide availability of guns in America that's unique amongst other countries, right? So you'll see kids taking their parents' guns and going to school with them in ways that you don't see in places where their parents don't have guns, right? But I am never personally that interested in that aspect of it because it's not my issue area. It's not my policy is education policy, and I don't have that many, you know, dogs in the gun control fight. The school-facing things that you see, I mean, you see America has a unique culture of this too. Dating back to Columbine, there's almost a subculture of the school shooter in a way that simply doesn't exist culturally in other countries. And that leads to things that the schools can do to protect, right? One is not always there will be your Uvalde shootings where there was no real outward sign of it, right? But in many shootings, possibly even most, it wasn't that hard to see coming, and the schools did not properly flag and address the threat. That was absolutely the case in Parkland. That was the case in Oxford, Michigan. That was the case in Newport News, in Virginia Beach. In a lot of cases, the teachers know that this kid's going to be a threat. And then the question is, does the school have a mechanism that they can spot the threat, assess the threat, refer the threat to law enforcement, take actions years before the threat becomes real to diffuse or address it? And in many cases, the answer is artificially no, because of these lenient discipline policies, because of a push to include students with extreme emotional and behavioral disturbances in normal mainstream classrooms. We're really kind of like cutting off our sensors on threat detection in American public schools. And the other thing is there are a lot of just small things that you can do right. You've seen kind of the tick-tock in the difference that a locked door makes, that a window that closes and doesn't break makes. Mm-hmm. The small stuff really can make a life or death difference. And so getting the small stuff right might not be sexy, might not flatter either political side, but can save lives at a very worthwhile cost. And then, you know, finally, you brought up the question of kind of arming teachers, arming school staff. This was something that going into the research that I did for the Parkland book, I think I was reflexively opposed to. I didn't like the way that it sounded. And a lot of the parents and officials on the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission, from my understanding, were against it. And then they reviewed just the minute-by-minute, second-by-second way that unfolded. And after they all saw the videos, and I never saw the videos, but I studied every, source document on how that unfolded that I could, they came to the unanimous decision that, yes, there should be armed staff in schools. And I understand the reflexive opposition to that amongst some people. I felt that way when I first heard the idea and the idea first started to circulate. But when you really just look at what can happen and what does happen, I think it's hard to responsibly come to a different conclusion than that there needs to be some good guy, ideally, enough good guys on a campus that if a shooter appears or a kid pulls out a gun and begins to shoot in a certain location, he can be addressed by somebody without having to wait the 7 to 12 minutes for the police to show up, or even longer.
Right. Max Eden, thank you so much for joining us again. And I want to thank you in particular again for your work on the book banning hoax. You have no idea how often I cite you in everyday conversation on the radio, the work that you've done in looking at PEN America's list and showing that 75% of it is actually untrue, that the books are in fact listed or they were just moved to another section. I seriously cite you like once a week on the air. So thank you for that. And we'd love to have you on again.
Yeah, always happy to.
Okay, take care. And
right,
say hi to everybody in D.C., especially the Kamala voters.
Yes,
Give them a pat on the back. Thank them for not inflicting any violence yet. Okay, so before we end, I know you've been dying to hear about this for the whole episode. It's MyPillow. Right now, you can get a standard MyPillow available for just $14.88. That's a savings that is too good to pass up. There's a limit of 10 per customer, so don't wait to take advantage of this great deal now with the promo code Hartman. And there's more. You can take home a 4-piece kitchen set for only $25. Enjoy their new mattress topper starting at just $99.99, or pick up the luxurious MyPillow bed sheets starting at $49.98. Now, I use many of these products. I sleep on a MyPillow. I use the Giza Dream bed sheets. I use my towels, and I wear my slippers. And I wouldn't advertise these products if I didn't use them. And again, you can get them at a big discount. Standard, classic, MyPillow is available for just $14.88. Visit MyPillow.com or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman to unlock big discounts. Don't miss out. Order today. Again, visit MyPillow.com or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow right here at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. And be sure to check out Dennis and Julie. We have a fantastic episode celebrating the Trump victory that aired on Sunday. So definitely do check that out. I'll see you soon. Take care.